Welcome. I'm Eric Fleming, host of A Moment with Eric Fleming, the podcast of our time. I want to personally thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like what you're hearing, then I need you to do a few things. First, I need subscribers. I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/A Moment with Eric Fleming. Your subscription allows an independent podcaster like me the freedom to speak truth to power and to expand and improve the show. Second, leave a 5-star review for the podcast on the streaming service you listen to it. That will help the podcast tremendously. Third, go to the website, momenteric.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, leave reviews and comments, listen to past episodes, and even learn a little bit about your host. Lastly, don't keep this a secret like it's your own personal guilty pleasure. Tell someone else about the podcast. Encourage others to listen to the podcast and share the podcast on your social media platforms because it is time to make this moment a movement. Thanks in advance for supporting the podcast of our time. I hope you enjoyed this episode as well.
The following program is hosted by the NVG Podcast Network.
Hello, and welcome to another Moment with Eric Fleming. I am your host, Eric Fleming. And today we are very, very blessed because I have two guests that are coming on, two ladies who have dedicated their lives to going home and making an impact in their home. And, one of the things that's been stressed all the time is that, in the communities that you live in, make as big of an impact as you can. Some people can do tremendous things. Some people can do small things, but anything that can be done positively to have an impact in the community will be greatly appreciated. And so it is my honor to have two women who've made that commitment to do that and to make a tremendous impact where they live. And at some point, I'm going to address people that are having a negative impact on where we live, and especially the country that we live in, even the world that we live in, right? So I'll get to that a little later after you listen to these incredible women. But before we do that, speaking about incredible women, it's time to kick off our program. And as always, we kick it off with a moment of news with Grace G.
Thanks, Eric. The Trump administration deployed National Guard troops and U.S. Marines to address immigration protests in Los Angeles, drawing criticism from California Governor Gavin Newsom and Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass. Over 290 people died when an Air India flight crashed into a medical college hostel shortly after takeoff from Ahmedabad to London, making it the deadliest aviation disaster in a decade, with at least one survivor reported. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Salvadoran mistakenly deported under Trump's policies, faced smuggling charges upon return to the United States, which prompted a prosecutor's resignation from the Department of Justice. President Trump announced plans to phase out FEMA after hurricane season, shift disaster relief funding directly through the White House, and reduce federal aid to states. A federal judge blocked the Trump administration from detaining or deporting Colombian student Mahmoud Khalil under foreign policy justifications. The Supreme Court allowed DOGE access to sensitive personal data despite privacy concerns. A $2.8 billion NCAA settlement approved by a judge permits compensating student athletes for name, image, and likeness use. The Supreme Court declined to challenge Washington, D.C.'s ban on high-capacity ammunition magazines, leaving the restriction intact. The U.S. State Department resumed Harvard student visa processing after a court blocked Trump's ban. And Sly Stone, funk pioneer and leader of Sly and the Family Stone, died at the age of 82. I am Grace G., and this has been A Moment of News.
All right. Thank you, Grace, for that moment of news. And now it is time for my guest, Angela Giampolo. Angela Giampolo is an expert on LGBTQ plus legal issues and the founder of Giampolo Law Group, a law firm serving the LGBTQ plus community for all of their legal needs. Philly Gay Lawyer is the advocacy arm of Angela's law firm, and she actively blogs at www.lawyer.lgbt and is a legal columnist for the Legal Intelligencer and the Philadelphia Business Journal. Angela appears on a monthly iHeartRadio show as the LGBTQ plus legal expert on a segment titled Speak Out. And she has appeared on NPR, Wall Street Journal, American News Radio, Fox News, and several Sirius stations. In the wake of the first Trump administration, Angela started a 501c3 nonprofit, the Caravan of Hope, where she takes 1 month out of her firm every year to drive 5,000 miles cross country, stopping in 14 cities to provide legal services to underprivileged and underserved LGBTQ plus folks in rural areas. In the wake of Trump 2.0, Angela co-founded the LGBTQ plus Pride Planning, an online and automated service providing affordable LGBTQ plus estate planning documents to folks in all 50 states. Angela has served on many boards of local, statewide, and national nonprofit organizations, including the Philadelphia Bar Association's Board of Governors, the Victory Fund, Liberty City Democratic Club, National Adoption Center, and Philadelphia Gay and Lesbian Lawyers of Philadelphia, better known as Gallup. In her career thus far, Angela has been bestowed the honor of being the National LGBT Bar Association Top 40 Under 40 LGBT Attorneys, Legal Intelligencer's Most Diverse Attorney, Philadelphia Business Journal's Woman of Distinction, Top 40 Under 40 Business People in Philadelphia, and Top 25 LGBTQ Owned Businesses 9 years running. Angela has worked in government at the Office of General Counsel in Harrisburg, at the Election Law Division, as well as with the United Nations at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda in prosecuting those responsible for the Rwandan genocide of 1994. Lastly, Angela is currently completing on her first book on how the LGBTQ plus community has protected themselves, their loved ones, and their rights through estate planning. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Angela Giampolo. All right, Angela Giampolo. How you doing, ma'am? You doing good?
I was born doing good.
Well, you're the only one. Most of us was at least screaming, crying, giving the doctor some fits. But I'm glad to know that at least one person was born doing good. But I know you've been doing good as an adult, for sure. And you've been a champion that I'm honored to recognize for what you've been doing. And I'm excited that you're getting ready to talk to the listeners about all that you do. But before we get started on all that, I do a couple of icebreakers. I guess it's the old moderator in me or whatever. But the first icebreaker is a quote. So I want you to respond to this quote. Always be clear what it is that you want and then make decisions accordingly. What does that quote mean to you?
Make decisions quickly, rapidly, and never change your mind. That is the definition of success. Be clear on what you want and then follow suit. And that quote is the definition of how and why I started the law firm that I did. I am not your typical lawyer, but I am very happy. Most lawyers will tell prospective law students not to go to law school because it's a miserable profession and you'll be miserable in all of the things. And I do not think so, but I knew what I wanted to do. I knew what I wanted my life to look like. And then I worked backwards from that vision and stayed the course. Even when I was afraid, even when I was alone, even, when it didn't make sense. But if I knew if that was my vision, then this is the course that I have to stay in order to reach that vision. So those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I understand at one point you were thinking about the WNBA, but you decided that that wasn't the move, huh?
So I didn't so much decide as my knees didn't agree. So I played basketball overseas, Sweden, Finland, Estonia, and blew out my knees in Estonia, or my one knee, my left knee in Estonia. Came back to the US, got that fixed, and I had not been playing professionally long enough that my NCAA status was still intact. And so then I played college ball and blew out before the season even started. Day one of training, blew out my right knee. And at that point, my team doctor was the team doctor for Duke when Bobby Hurley was rehabilitated from a body cast back to the court in 9 months. And this team doctor was like, oh my God, he's amazing. He's able to bring someone back from a body cast back to the court in 9 months. And he looked at my itty bitty little orthoscopic knee surgery and he was like, you're done. And I was like, what? Like, you're the guy. What do you mean? And he was like, nope, you can't come back from this. He's like, your kneecap is literally too small for the groove that it sits in. Like, I can't fix that. Like, that's just literally what your kneecap looks like. And so every 6 to 9 months, you're going to be back here with the knee surgery. This is going to keep happening. And at that time, my coach, 32 years old, beautiful to look at from the front. And then she'd turn around and walk away and she looked like a 92-year-old cripple because she had 5 knee surgeries while in college. So I had no idea where I had the wisdom because I was a 19-year-old idiot. You know what I mean? And basketball was my life. I have no idea where I had the wisdom, but I said, you know what? I'm transferring out and I'm done with basketball. I don't want to be her. I just distinctly remember that visual of her walking away from me and at 32 barely being able to walk. And I said, I don't want to be that. And so I transferred and I ended up at LaSalle University in Philadelphia. And that's all she wrote.
Yeah. Well, that's all she wrote in basketball, but it led to this incredible law career. So
yeah, I mean, I never knew I had a brain until that. If my knees hadn't blown out, we wouldn't have been talking.
Well, we might have been. You never know how the world works. So my other icebreaker is I need you to give me a number between 1 and 20.
7.
All right. What do you consider the best way to stay informed about politics, current events, health, etc.?
So what about the 7? That was it?
Yeah, the 7. That was the question. Yeah.
That was it. No.
No, there's no grand prize with this. There's no.
Okay.
This is behind door number 7. No, that's not how that works. Your prize is the question I just asked you.
Gotcha. All right. So what is my way of saying current? I am very, very guarded about push notifications to me. So I have a very few select outlets that I do choose to get push notifications that tell me what I want to know at any time when I may or may not be ready for it. LGBTQ Nation, them.us, Advocate, and then other than that, a couple of friends that I trust who do get push notifications from CNN, BBC, and all of the things, but I don't want to get those. But other than that, I do not proactively on a daily basis read the news or do anything about taking on current events other than very specific LGBTQ, and cryptocurrency. I'm huge into crypto. So there's IA Answers, which is a YouTube channel, James, who's awesome, and all things crypto I get through him, and then Verify in other ways. But as far as the daily news and whether we're going to war or life things that are happening, I get that through LGBTQ specific outlets. Other folks email me or text me if there's something they think I should know that's outside of that. And then crypto, I get through IA Answers.
So let me make a note. So when I want to have a crypto discussion, let me call Angela again, get her on.
I call it crypto queerency.
That's good, because that actually leads into my next question. How did you get the designation of being Philadelphia's gay lawyer? And was that a designation that you sought out? Now, I know, back in the day, I'm old enough to remember that was like, if you wanted to get a good lawyer, you got to get a Philadelphia lawyer. You know what I'm saying? And then, all I kept thinking about, was Denzel Washington and Tom Hanks in that movie, right? And so I'm just curious, how did you become the lawyer for the LGBTQ community? How did and was that something you really wanted to do?
Yeah, I definitely premeditated it. I bought the domain Philly Gay Lawyer in college.
Okay.
Long before I was a lawyer. So I'm probably one of the few lawyers that became a lawyer to fulfill a business model. I'm Canadian originally, and living here in the US, I saw that there was a distinct differentiation in how the laws treat folks. And basically there's gay law and straight law. For a minute there, we were turning the tide where there was just the law. And now it's even worse than it was 17 years ago when I started my practice. So initially it was Philly Gay Lawyer, and that was the moniker that I went by. There was my law firm, Giampolo Law Group, and anybody, and even now the tagline is, we represent the LGBTQ community and those who love us. We represent everyone, but let's be clear, and those who love us. And that's on the awning outside. I own the building. We have a forever home for Giampolo Law Group. And on the awning outside, at a very walkable, busy area in Philly, right off of South Street, 500 feet from South Street, there's a big sign that says, we represent the LGBTQ community and those who love us. And I have straight people who email me all day and say, we love you, and we would love for you to be my lawyer and all of the things. But 17 years ago, or even, earlier than that in college, it just always made sense to me that people do business with people that they know, love, and trust. They used to say know, like, and trust. And I feel like we're at a point, and have been for several years, where it needs to be know, love, and trust, right? And the love piece, obviously they don't love me before they meet me, but they can go online, they can see the things that I'm doing, that I stand for, that I'm putting my money where my mouth is, and all of the things. And that part they can feel. And without fail, when most people reach out, they mention something about having Googled me and your Caravan of Hope, your love of senior chihuahuas, this, that, the other. So yeah, it was definitely a niche that I started out in. My law school professors, the two that I respected the most, said, don't do it. At that point, back in 2008, you represent 3% of the population. You're going to start a law firm representing 3% of the population. Why would you do that? You're going to need PB&Js the rest of your life. But we always represented more than 3%. It's just so many people weren't out. There wasn't a way to count us on the census, and I was like, this is what I want to do. And so I've always been a low volume, because we don't make up 100% of the population. So I've always been a low volume, high touch law firm, and we really love what we do and how we do it and who we do it for.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting that you had that vision, and you set out to do it, as opposed to it just kind of fell in your lap that's all you were getting.
I think because I'm the daughter of two entrepreneurs. So my dad stopped school in second grade, third grade maybe, and followed his father last name Giampolo, so read between the lines. But they went off and did that, and then my mom stopped at typewriting school, and then they met. My mom's from Quebec, and then they met, and they started a business, and I just grew up with entrepreneurs, and so I didn't know any other way. Monopoly was my jam, and I won all the time. My poor brother never could win, even though he's older than me, and so it was just before I even realized it, I knew that I was going to open up my own business, and then the other part about me is I'm always going to be happy. Edie Windsor, marriage equality plaintiff, never postponed joy. And that always rang, true for me. So it's like, if I'm going to open up my own law firm, what's it going to look like? How am I going to exist in it? Who are we going to serve in order to ensure that I love what I do on a daily basis? And that was very clear.
So you mentioned the Caravan of Hope. Kind of explain what that is and how did you even come up with the concept of doing that?
Yeah, so the Caravan of Hope is exactly what it sounds like. It's a caravan, 32-foot RV that I take cross country once a year, and we stop in 14 cities providing pro bono legal services to LGBTQ folks, specifically in rural and underserved areas where folks don't have an easy, at least, access to someone like myself, a competent out. Not that they have to be out. Some of my partners in these cities are not out, especially, I won't name the cities, or the states, but some of the southern ones, trans lawyers that aren't out. So the out part doesn't matter, but at least competent in LGBTQ legal issues. And in rural areas, folks don't have access to those. So it was 2016, Trump 1.0, and I was super depressed. And folks in Philadelphia, HRC, at that point, HRC's to this day even, number one rated city in the country, tied 8 ways with Seattle and New York and San Fran and, all of the things. Yet folks in Philadelphia were messaging me on Facebook and emailing me and all the things, like, we're afraid. So if folks in Philadelphia, HRC's number one rated city in the country, folks are vehemently afraid, what about Fort Worth, Texas, Mississippi, Memphis, Tennessee? What about those folks? And this unidentifiable, no face avatar never left basically the front of my brain. And while I was helping folks in Philadelphia and in New Jersey, I always had this vision of this person that I didn't know, that had never reached out, but that I knew existed in these rural areas. And it's like, if folks here need me, what about there? What are they feeling? How afraid are they? And so it was in between election and inauguration, literally December 31st. I always do private solo strategic planning. And the idea just came to me. Caravan of Hope. That's what, everybody needed and wanted. It was post-Obama hope, and it was just like, this is what we need. And so I take 1 month off out of my law firm. This year it's going to be October, National Coming Out Month, and drive 5,000 miles and visit these 14 cities and provide pro bono legal services.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. It was like, that's what really caught my attention to you. It was like, okay, so this lawyer is traveling the country to provide legal services for folks. And then the timing of it, that was when I was doing my ACLU work in Mississippi. So yeah, it's just, I just think that's incredible. That was one of the reasons why I was drawn to get you on, because as a Black person, one of the things that was really, really hard to do was to get lawyers to do civil rights work. And you would think that would be a no-brainer, but it's like, just like your law professors were saying, you're in the legal profession to make income, and to sustain a business. And, a lot of that civil rights work, a lot of people that need that work They can't pay top lawyer rates or anything like that. And you only can do so many pro bono hours. So it's just really, really tough. So I can only imagine from the LGBTQ community how desperate it is to, well, not imagine. I mean, I kind of know, but I mean, it's like, it's just how desperate it is for people to, one, trust that somebody's going to do the work for them and be thorough about it. And then two, availability. So, I commend you for having the courage and the vision to do that. So, speaking about clients, how have you been helping your clients navigate through these early days of the Trump administration? And I guess I'll throw in another question. You're a dual citizen, so you have citizenship in Canada and here in the United States. Did you ever think at some point, yeah, I might need to cash in on this Canadian citizenship and get them out of here?
Yeah.
And then since you
I mean, I
decided,
thought that in 2016, my friend,
yeah,
if I had, but yeah, I mean, it's real. As when I say it's real, for 17 years, there's always been not even for 17 years that I've had my law firm, but we look at what LGBTQ plus folks have been dealing with historically, right? And we've been here before. My elder, especially gay male mentors, brought dead bodies to Congress steps and laid them on the Capitol, laid dead bodies on the Capitol Hill steps saying, you did this because you won't talk about this, right? So the pendulum has been swinging back and forth historically, but Eric, the pendulum snapped and full on hit us in the face. Like there's no more what if, right? If we were to look at a year ago to today, a year ago in all of 2024, there were 525 anti-LGBTQ bills introduced. In the first 6 months of this year, 575 more in the first 6 months. We are on pace to double that and be at 1,200 or definitely more than 1,000 anti-LGBTQ bills, right? So the first question was, how have you been helping your clients? Second, as a Canadian, when would you cash in? At the end of the day, you have to put the mask on yourself, right? As the plane goes down before you do anyone else, the oxygen mask. And I am not a conspiracy theorist by any way, shape, or form, but I do believe there are lists. I have a nonprofit. I have a 501c3 where I put myself, I registered with the IRS as having an LGBTQ focus, right? And then you have Doge, who just took 27 million IRS Social Securities. Like, I know they're compiling lists. I know I'm on a list. And so if at some point I have to leave, I will. I'll probably use my Canadian citizenship to go south. It's really cold there. So I'll probably choose somewhere else and then do exactly what we're doing now. I mean, during COVID, I moved 3,000 miles away to La Jolla, San Diego, and said, you know what? If we're going to die, we're going to die in the most beautiful place in this country, because we had no idea what was happening. And actually, I stopped doing any litigation. My revenue shot up 30%, but I lived 3,000 miles away. And that was a huge demarcation point in my loving my law firm. Was for 2.5 years, I didn't actually live in Philadelphia, but I got all my clients on board with doing this via Zoom. And then I would fly back every 6 weeks and I would do signings and things in ink. And so I'm fine. If I have to leave, it will be I have to leave. It's not I will choose to leave. It'll be that it's best for everyone, meaning more so the LGBTQ community, that I actually remove myself so that I can continue to help them. That's the only time that I would leave. And then how I've been helping them, from what they've said and their feedback, both on social and, real life clients, is being an objective, authentic balance of being honest when shit gets real and telling them this is really effing bad, And you know what? Don't worry about that. That's a red herring. You have nothing to worry about. But there's certain things I see going through the news, like when Michigan state rep was like, we're calling for the overturning of Obergefell. And everyone was like, oh my God, like marriage is going to be overturned tomorrow. No, this guy has zero power. Let it go. He's saying what they've been saying for 12 years. He's just reiterating it to get on the news. Only the Supreme Court can do that. You are safe for right now. Do I think you're not safe 2 years from now? 100%. I think Obergefell is being overturned. But you're not going to wake up tomorrow because this guy in Michigan said it should be. Right? And so that authentic, honest, not fear-mongering, also not placating, also not monotone, but just 23andMe, going bankrupt. And folks like Elon Musk and others wanting to buy all the DNA data. Delete your shit. These are people who believe in eugenics, which is basically genocide before you have to do genocide. It's basically, let's just create a human race that we believe in, which means no black people, no gay people, no ADHD, no mental health, let's just remove all genetics of anything that we think is inferior. And then that becomes the future. And with all of the information of DNA with 23andMe. So I feel like, and then there's the work on the ground, like the actual work that I can do for people where they retain me to do their LGBTQ estate planning, do their confirmatory adoptions, do their name changes, do their, identity marker changes. But I would say the biggest way in which I've helped is to just be a voice and a soundboard of all the noise and negativity out there. And I think you should listen to that and don't listen to that. And people trust that because I treat them like I would want to know that information, right? And none of it helps me get clients or anything like that. Once I was deathly ill. Can't believe that video went viral. Deathly ill. I looked horrible. It was 2 a.m. and I was like, this is what and of course because it was important information regardless of what I looked or sounded like, but it was important information and people just see that,
Yeah. Well, you're also pretty good at prognosticating because you basically answered 2 of my next questions. But I'm a drill down on one of them because I was going to ask you about the 23andMe for real. And then I want you to explain why is estate planning such an important legal, I guess, strategy for the LGBTQ community.
Estate planning has been for decades, over 50 years, our first impenetrable, inseverable line of defense. It is what we've been using to create ties between and with one another that we couldn't do legally. You could be together 47 years and you don't have an estate planning. This is long before marriage equality, obviously. You have no estate planning documents. You die. Everything goes to the homophobic family that you're estranged from that disowned you when you were 16, right? So, and even if you had a lovely family, all of the things, nothing could pass to someone that you were with and were committed to the same way a straight couple would get married and be together for 47 years. So we've known forever that we needed estate planning documents in order to recreate those marriages. Then marriage equality hit. Now, one of the things that I always say is there are 1,138 state and federal privileges tied to marriage. Privileges, rights, not power. There is zero power inherent in marriage. I got passionate around this topic 20 years ago with the Terry Schiavo case. Straight married cis couple, 29 years old. Terry Schiavo ended up in a persistent vegetative state, brain aneurysm. He was not her healthcare power of attorney. She did not have an advance directive or a living will. He had no more power over his wife's body than the mother did. Mom disagreed. They duked it out in litigation. He went bankrupt after 8 years. She languished on life support for 15 years. We, 10 years ago, got marriage equality, and sociologically, psychologically, I feel as though we breathed in legitimacy for the first time and mistook that for power because it felt good to be seen, to be legitimized in this country, and we mistook it for power, but we've never had power. Straight people don't have power in their marriage, just like Terry Schiavo's husband. So There are fiscally advantageous, financially significant privileges tied to marriage, 1,138 of them. Social Security survivor benefits, inheritance rights, inheritance tax, probate avoidance, you name it, immigration rights, bankruptcy rights. Basically, there's gay law and straight law, and it's all tied to marriage. I never thought I'd agree with Rand Paul on anything, or he, me for that matter, but there we were on Newsmax making for bad TV because we were in complete agreement that if they wanted marriage to remain a religious institution, they never should have tied 1,138 privileges to it. But if I were told right now that I was going to an island tonight and I could only take one thing with me, privilege or power, I would take power time and again. And only the estate planning documents give you that. Being someone's healthcare power of attorney, being able to live out their living will, their end of life wishes, being able to be their executor, being able, hospital visitation authorization forms. And that's another thing, Eric. For 17 years, I've been treating my clients as though they're unmarried, even after marriage equality, because even after marriage equality, we're only considered married in 37 countries out of 195 that fly a flag. I fly to Beijing. I fall in the Great Wall of China. Wife and I are not married. Get nipped by lion and safari in Tanzania. It's illegal to be gay. I don't want you yelling, that's my husband. Right? So 37 out of 195, that is a fraction. So I've always done these documents for folks, even after marriage equality, treating them as though they're unmarried, because that is the reality globally. And that's how I protect my clients, the most. So through these estate planning documents, there's 9 essential estate planning documents that I recommend for my LGBTQ folks. And with that, no matter where you are in the world or what's happening with marriage equality here in Obergefell and all the things, you can consider yourself safe outside of the pendulum.
Yeah. And that's just good to know, period. But I was in doing my research, I noticed you really, really emphasized that. So I wanted you to expound on that a great deal. All right. So we're going to close it out, but there's been a couple of things that, have been going on. And so I wanted to get your take on it, because you're not only an attorney, but you're an activist in the community. And so Riley Gaines, what's your thoughts about her and people like her? I'm going to tell you what I think about her. And then
you tell me.
Or you agree or disagree. I think she's an incredible loser. I think she is
an incredible what?
Loser. I think she's the worst loser in the history of sports. I can understand if you were fighting for a gold medal and you missed it by 1/10 of a second. I can understand you being disappointed and you have a grievance and all that. But even at some point, you got to get over that. But you weren't even in the top 5 in this particular race that you were upset about. And it's like you just harped on this one swimmer who was transgender. But there were 3 other swimmers that were better than you. And it's like, and it's like, what the hell? So you're not mad at them? I mean, what's the young lady, Shabalenka? She was mad at Coco Gauff because he beat her 1-on-1. It's like you're not mad at these 3 other women. You're just picking on the one who finished in 4th place, right? I just think she's the most incredible. I think out of all the grifters, she's got to be the greatest grifter, because it was like you haven't won anything, and you were given this platform. That's just me.
So before she lost, if you Googled her, it always said a conservative political activist. So I almost compared her to J.K. Rowling, but it's not really a relevant comparison. But I think she took the opportunity of this loss to put herself in the spotlight of the MAGA conservatives to then get more opportunity going that way, since she obviously knows swimming's not happening in any way, shape, or form. So I agree with you. I mean, she sucks at her sport, like, awesome, way to go, But like most people who surround themselves around Trump, in my opinion, they're all opportunists. They all see how being within a certain degree of separation from him helps them do the thing that they've always wanted to do. So she lost and then went after the fifth place person, right? Like there, to your point, you're absolutely correct. There's zero tie to her loss and that person winning. There were all these people in between, but she was an opportunist and went after that and is now on the spotlight. And MAGA people are talking to her and she's on news circuits and doing all the things and exactly where she wanted to be. I wish Simone Biles hadn't apologized yesterday. I think her reaction was immediate and therefore authentic. It was almost immediate. I think it was like 46 minutes after Riley's comment went live. Then Simone Biles on X, commented. But it was so soon that it was obviously authentic. And then a few days later to apologize for it, I don't know. I don't know who's advising her, but I wouldn't have done that.
Well, it's definitely handlers. It's like somebody's like, well, Simone, you got this appeal. Your husband's in the NFL. You got, we got to think of Wheaties. We got to think of that. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, you're always going to have those kind of protectionists because, of course, their income is based off her income. So, that's one of those things where it's like you just have to, as Kendrick Perkins would say, stand on business and just let that ride. I really hated that when I saw that she had apologized, what this girl made a reference to a trauma that happened in Simone's life, and Simone's the ones apologizing.
Yeah,
right? What are we doing? But anyway, I just wanted to get that off my chest, and I'm glad you helped me do that.
But does that make sense? Does that make sense that I think she just used it as an opportunity to just further ingrain herself in the MAGA political?
That's exactly what all of them do.
She'll probably be Speaker of the House next week.
God, I hope. Well, I might need to borrow your Canadian membership if it gets that instant. But the other thing connected with that is, what was your reaction to the decision to remove Harvey Milk's name from the Navy?
Oh,
everything
they did during Pride Month. I mean, the White Hat. This month is Title IX month, as they remove all purposely removing. June is not Pride Month. June is Title IX month, where we remove all trans athletes from colleges and whatnot. There are two people that are no longer here that I think about a lot. Some daily, every once in a while, daily, definitely weekly, and that's Matthew Shepard and Harvey Milk.
Yeah,
I know this is audio, but you have a Got Milk thing behind me, right there, right, with his face. So you don't have to say Got Milk because it's just Got Harvey, right? And so that was huge. He was dishonorably discharged for being gay at a time, and when right now on last Friday, all trans folks were honorably, if they chose to leave and accept the separation and termination, separated from active forces. Salt in the wounds. There's no other way to say it. At a time when trans folks in particular are being actively separated from all military branches, and it's Pride Month, and to publicly do that was just like the vitriol, the meanness. It's just gross. It almost doesn't impact me because it's so gross. But again, I think about, just like the Caravan of Hope, I think about those that are not as resilient as I am, that haven't fought the fight, that it's my career. This is what I've signed up to do. But there are folks just trying to live. That this does actually impact them negatively, mentally. Suicide rates have skyrocketed, and so, yeah, it's just gross.
Yeah, and then, again, they wanted to take Medgar Evers' name off, and Harriet Tubman, and, just anybody who, like you said.
Well, that's the other thing, Eric. Like, we're talking about LGBTQ things because that's what I do, but it's like that poem, they came for the trade unionists, but I'm not a trade unionist, so I didn't stand up. They came for the communists, but I'm not a communist, so I didn't stand up. They came for the Jews, but I'm not a Jew, so I didn't stand up. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to stand up. There are 270 words that they deemed to be woke and diverse that were removed from the White House website, including black.
As my friend said, I don't mean to cut you off, but as my friend would say it louder because the people in the back didn't hear that.
Totally. But I mean, woman, uterus, pregnant, black, equity, diversity. We're all, if you are not a white, rich man, cis man, like you are on the chopping block. You are on the menu because you're not at the table anymore. We're all on the menu. You're on the menu. I'm on the menu. Most of the people probably are sitting on the menu. So, yeah, folks say, like, what can I do? If nothing else, just know that everyone is an ally to someone. Even if you're a black, straight, cis guy, you're an ally to a black gay man or another black person or a white lesbian. Like, you're an ally. We are only going to get through this together. Period. End of story. That's how we've all dealt with horrific things throughout the history of the United States of America. I don't think this ends in my lifetime. I think this is it. I think this is a demarcation point for while I'll be alive for the United States of America. But I do, Martin Luther King, the arc of moral justice bends long, but ultimately, I'm bastardizing that quote, but towards justice, something like that. The arc is long. And I think in my lifetime, this will be what the United States continues to be, unfortunately. And so I'm here to help LGBTQ folks and those who love us survive it and actually try to thrive during it.
So if people want to get your help, if people want to contact you and all that, how can they get in touch with you?
So Instagram, Your Gay Lawyer, TikTok, just Gay Lawyer. And my law firm is Giampolo Law Group. My website is very simple, lawyer.lgbt. So it's not .com, it's lawyer.lgbt. And it's like the gayest website ever. And you'll find me there. So Your Gay Lawyer on Instagram, Gay Lawyer on TikTok, or lawyer.lgbt on the internet.
Well, Angela Giampolo, we talked for a good minute, but it seems like a disservice because I feel we can talk a long time and cover a lot of ground about a lot of things, but I am honored that you took the time today to do that. And I hope that my listeners gathered something from what you were saying. So, and I hope that you continue to, tell people about how people can donate to the Caravan, because that's one of your
Caravan of Hope.
nonprofits.
Yeah, Caravan of Hope is just Caravan of Hope also .lgbt. So caravanofhope.lgbt. And then you can go there and there's a donate button. All we really look for is gas money. I mean, I pay for the Caravan. I self-fund. The more I raise, the better. Like, it's an entire month out of my practice. I don't have the bandwidth or the time to raise the amount of money that I need to in order to really make it a net even. But if anyone wants to donate, it's appreciated. Yeah. So caravan.lgbt.
All right. Well, Angela, again, thank you for doing what you're doing and for being not only an activist, but a sign of hope for not just the community you serve, but for the nation that you live in. So thank you again.
Again, and Eric, thank you. You reached out back in February, almost 4 months ago, right in the height of everything. Thank you for using your platform to spread this information, to spread the hope. Ultimately, again, we are all allies and we can all do our part. And this is your way of doing your part of spreading this out to your audience. And it's been lovely to share a moment with you, even though it's longer than normal.
No, this is good. All right, guys, we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right, and we are back. And so now It is time for my next guest, Dr. Felecia Pullen. Dr. Felecia Pullen is Harlem born and raised and is a leading researcher, advocate, and social entrepreneur dedicated to health equity, racial justice, and addiction recovery. She is the founder, president, and CEO of Let's Talk Safety, Inc. And over the last 10 years, she has overseen the operations of the Pillars and SAFE in Harlem. Both divisions of Let's Talk Safety, Inc. are New York State and federally funded programs that have provided holistic health and wellness services for nearly 50,000 adults, teens, and youth in the community. Dr. Pullen, alongside her dedicated staff, work to provide comprehensive support to individuals and families in New York City, particularly those affected by systemic racism and structural oppression. Under Dr. Pullen's leadership, Let's Talk Safety, Inc. has secured over $6.2 million in local, state, and federal funding, enabling her to offer job training, mentorship, health care, holistic wellness, prevention programming for under-resourced adults, teens, and youth who face barriers to education, health care, employment, and stable housing. As a qualitative researcher, Dr. Pullen applies critical race theory to examine structural racism's impact on people of color, especially those in recovery and who use substances. She is known for designing innovative frameworks to drive social and health equity. She has advised policymakers, served on New York City's Municipal Drug Strategy Council, and holds key leadership roles on the 4NY Ballistic Street Wellness Solutions and Let's Talk Safety Board of Directors. Dr. Pullen is a sought-after speaker on addiction prevention, critical race theory, recovery capital, racialized drug enforcement policies, harm reduction, and financial equity for small nonprofits. Her unwavering commitment to advocacy, research, and community empowerment continues to shape policies and improve lives in Harlem, across New York City, nationwide, and beyond. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Dr. Felecia Pullen. All right, Dr. Felecia Pullen. How you doing, sister? You doing good?
I'm great, thanks. How are you, Eric?
I'm doing fine. I'm honored and glad that you were able to come on. I appreciate you taking the time out to talk about the work that you're doing. One of the things I like to do to kick everything off is I do some icebreakers. So my first icebreaker is a quote, and I want you to respond to that quote. In recovery, I found that my purpose was to come back to the community where I was born and raised. I want the youth to see me as an example of what is possible in the community. Talk to me about that quote.
First of all, it's interesting because I didn't think that you were going to give me my own quote. But yeah, after 30 years in corporate America, found my purpose and understood that my purpose wasn't about a pretty pair of shoes or a nice designer bag. It was about giving back to where I was born and raised and trying to prevent young people from traveling down some roads that I definitely traveled down that helped me be who I am. But it was really important for me to live in my true purpose and not, a Tiffany's box that was empty on the inside after you opened it up.
Yeah. All right. So my next icebreaker is something I call 20 questions. So give me a number between 1 and 20.
12.
Okay. What advice do you have for recognizing fake news?
Ooh, why did I pick 12? So I'm a researcher, right? And I will just defer to that sense and sensibility that I have. I don't just gravitate to what resonates for me. If something resonates for me, I will also do the research and check the sources. And if something doesn't resonate for me and it doesn't make sense, I question that too. So I think that it's important to just question everything right now, especially with AI and everything that is in our ethos, right? In the atmosphere that is coming at us so quickly, that the first thing that I would say is question what you're hearing and what you're exposed to and research.
Yeah. You recently said, this is not the only quote I got from you. You recently said, if I want to know why I'm passionate about and committed to my work, it's because it's never about the work. I owe my community. I owe my people. I owe my elders, and I owe our children. So let's discuss the work that you are so passionate about. Talk to the listeners about Let's Talk Safety and the Pillars Recovery Center.
Yeah. So in 2013, I actually conceptualized Safe in Harlem. And Safe in Harlem is the prevention of the onset of use for teens and youth. And that was really born out of first my journey in addiction and then my journey in recovery. So it was very organic for me to think about, well, how do I prevent young people from, crack addiction, heroin addiction, alcohol addiction, because those are the things that I was exposed to and impacted by growing up in Harlem. So there were some processes that I used in order to get to this thing that is Let's Talk Safety, the Pillars, and Safe in Harlem. And that's answering my who, what, where, when, and why. And I encourage all young people when they talk about, what they want to be when they grow up. It's, well, what is your who, what, where, when, and why? Who was I passionate about? I am and always passionate about Black people and people of color. The where was Harlem because I was born and raised in Harlem, and that's where a lot of my early experiences occurred. The what was addiction because of what I had journeyed through and had come to the other side of. And the when was, this needs to happen absolutely now, because as I look at the community and the history of Harlem, the beauty of Harlem, but also the disinvestment in Harlem, I knew that there was work that I needed to do, and I needed to do it there and now.
Yeah. So what was your Damascus Road experience, right? What was the moment that got you from, your self-awareness that it was like, okay, I have an addiction and I need to recover? What was that moment like?
That moment was, I am spending way too much time in my bathroom consuming drugs, and I have children on the other side of that door. And it didn't feel good. I knew that I wasn't the woman that I was supposed to be. I was not the mother I was supposed to be. I was not the wife that I was supposed to be. I was not the daughter, the sister I was supposed to be. And this is not what was intended for me. I knew that in my soul and in my heart. But I also, it took me a long time before I got to the part where I understood that the journey led me to here and now. So there was a purpose for that journey once I got to the other side. But that Damascus Road was, I am not living up to who I am and what I am supposed to be to all of these people in my inner circle.
Yeah. So yet another profound quote you said was that I'm not religious, but I'm guided. Expound on that, especially as it relates to the work that you do.
Oh, I am definitely guided. And I call my guide God. Religious, I don't go to church, and I don't feel like I need this middle person or middle people between me and God. He, and I refer as a he, speaks to me and speaks to me loudly every day. And sometimes I'm smart enough to go, yep, I heard you. Let me go do that. Usually it's like the third time when he's screaming at me and I'm like, okay, I heard you. Now let me go do that. So, often I'm still defiant and willful, but I am so guided by God. And I know that the pillars and Safe in Harlem is God-led. I'm only the vessel that opens the doors and comes through and speaks to the politicians and speaks to the people and gets the young people together. I'm just a vessel.
Yeah. So one of the things when I was doing my research, you were focused in on, you got a lot of headlines when you were trying to educate pregnant mothers about marijuana use. You know, a lot of states have legalized marijuana now, recreational use. And a lot of people talk about, well, you know, that people debate about whether it's a gateway drug or not. But, you know, and I've had people on this podcast pro and con as far as legalization. But, you know, one of the things I think you were trying to stress was that marijuana has a similar, if not a greater impact on pregnant women. Talk about that and why you felt that it was important. Well, I take that back. It was like, from what I understand, the hospital community reached out to you to do this work. So just kind of talk about that. And I guess it's been about almost 10 years since you started doing that work, and what kind of results have you been able to achieve?
Yeah, wow. I didn't realize that it's been that long because I still feel very passionate about that. Really, it was an education campaign. And I am very tied to multiple sectors that help me do the work that I do. Right. And so I never claim to be like this, one woman shop that just gets it all done. It is because of some amazing partners that I have in the community that I'm able to do the work. And yes, one of our hospital, it's a doctor who was the chief of pediatrics and neonatology that had informed me that several mothers, and I'm going to say, and who were tested at the time of birth, the babies who were tested at the time of birth were testing positive for THC. And there was some data that was presented to me from the American, Medical Association and Pediatrics Association that said that it impacted the fetal brain development. And that resonated enough for me that I knew that there was something that I should do about it, but I needed to make sure that it was from this compassionate perspective, right? Yes, marijuana is legal, and yes, it has benefits for people who use it. And our children need every opportunity that they can have from the womb to the tomb to succeed. And so I just wanted to inform moms, if you are smoking and pregnant, here is the data. This is what the data is saying that is a harm to the fetal brain development. And with no judgment, come to the pillars, take a yoga class. Let us show you how to use some of these other alternative forms of that medicine, if that's why they were using it, that you can use to de-stress and to really bring a more healthy baby to full term. So that's where that came from. And I'm grateful for the partnerships that I had that brought that information to me, and that we were able to just love on women who were pregnant and smoking at the time.
Yeah. So you mentioned yoga, and one of the things is that with pillars is that you deliberately have a holistic approach to addressing issues about addiction and recovery. Kind of elaborate on what all that you offer with that.
Yeah. So we offer, and holistic is not just the alternative forms of medicine like Reiki that we offer, acupuncture, yoga, meditation. Holistic really refers to that whole person. And so the Pillars logo is in 4 parts for a reason. And it talks about what we offer that is a direct benefit to self. And then to the family, we have parenting skills enhancement classes. To the community, we distribute naloxone. We also we host AA and NA meetings. But that last piece is about integration and reintegration into society as a whole. And that's the workforce development that we do. So we make sure that, it's the individual that's coming in, and also how do we help to support their family? How do we help them in community, whether they are directly impacted by addiction or a family member of, or a community member that is impacted by addiction, because we are all touched by it in some way, shape, or form. And then that workforce development piece that is important to, housing stability, economic stability, and familial stability.
Yeah, and I appreciate you defining it totally. But the approach about yoga and all that is unique to me. Most of the programs that I've been affiliated with or know about is like they make sure that you go through the steps and the one that I had direct impact with was like the religious component was in there, that they had to attend church while they were in rehab, our church, since we were sponsoring the program. So people kind of do that, but I never had heard about doing things that most people, just kind of do to de-stress, and never really heard it applied to, recovery. And so what led you to use that? Was it something in your research? Was it God talking to you? What exactly got you to say, let's try this approach, especially with people in the inner city?
Yeah, it was all of those things, right? And so when I went to rehab, I had private health insurance, and my private health insurance paid $50,000 for me to do 57 days in rehab. And during that time, I was exposed to a lot of the things that I just mentioned. The acupuncture, there was a sweat lodge. I mean, I was very fortunate and privileged, right? So I have to also understand, as a woman in this recovery space, but also when I was in that state of active use, I was privileged. And so I wanted to make sure that income was not a barrier to receiving all of the things that I was exposed to and that I found to be beneficial in my journey. And so when I was doing my who, what, where, when, and why, right? What services am I going to bring to this community? It was, yep, that acupuncture was great. I de-stressed. I was able to listen to that inner voice and that spirituality that we often talk about in recovery. And I just needed to bring that back and offer that to that inner city community that, and I'm really glad that you touched on the part about the inner city, because there's a misnomer that, we don't really take advantage of, let's say, Reiki. I think it's the name that is confusing to us, because as a Black people, we have been talking about laying hands on forever, right? We want to lay hands on. And that's really what Reiki is. It is an opportunity for one person to use their energy to heal another. So none of this is really unique to our community, but some of the names may be different from what we're used to calling them.
Yeah, yeah. That just reminds me of that Wire episode where Idris Elba, his character, he's been dealing drugs all this time. And then he finally decides to go to a community college and to take business. And he looks in the business and he's seeing what these folks are doing. He said, "Oh, we've been doing this the whole time. It just was, we just called it something different." And, I think that, we've been exposed to a lot of things in our community. And because of our history, we've lost a connection with that. And so, for you to try to bring some of those connections back, like you said, we've called it laying hands for years, especially in the church community, but to bring it back, and people are like, "Oh, okay, I get it." They were thinking, I'm sure some people probably like, "Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to do this Reiki stuff, doc. That sounds a little," and then when they realized what it was, it's like, "Oh yeah, we've been doing this all the time. So I'm glad that you took that approach to that and explained it so people would feel comfortable doing it. What is the biggest challenge you face in doing your work?
That is a that is a huge question. Certainly financial. I That's number one. That's the biggest challenge are the financial resources to do the work. And I think that part of that is me, and part of that are the systems in which we operate. And so when I say part of that is me, is I want to do all things that are necessary for our people to thrive, not just to survive, but to thrive. So it's my desire. And the systems that I am confined within are not designed for people to thrive. So it's a conflict between what I want to do for the people and what I am able to do based on the funding.
Yeah. And whenever I'm having these conversations with people, that's kind of a general theme. Well, systems not designed to, do this or do that. And I've never, I tend to understand the results, but I never really got into that. And I tell you why. The only reason why I say that is because maybe I'm altruistic about it. And of course, as you get older, you might get a little jaded, but I just feel that systems were meant to be altered, right? And I use sports as an example. Basketball was around for a long time and, it had become a professional sport. And then somebody looked at the rules and said, okay, I can't go forward without dribbling the ball, but there's nothing saying I can't go vertical with the ball. And they invented the jump shot. They said, I'm not going to stand here and let this guy block my shot. I'm going to jump over him and shoot it. Right. And it changed the game. Now, it wasn't designed that way, but somebody found a way to make it work and in essence, change the dynamics of it where people were able to succeed more. So that's just kind of my mindset about systems. I'm not really pushing back on you. I just, when I hear that, because what you're doing is breaking that cycle about what the system is restricting people to do. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And I love that analogy. And if I took that analogy and applied it to the continuum of care, yes, we've gone vertically, even with the conceptualization of a recovery center, because that was not always a part of recovery. Neither was harm reduction. Neither was safe consumption sites. So there has definitely been this vertical jump shot, if you will, relative to the continuum of care across the recovery spectrum. And it is also frustrating when somebody blocks your shot. When you are trying to use the lane that you were given and say, I thank you for altering the rules. And within this framework, I am now going to expand what this means and what this can be. But you're dealing with people in the system that cannot conceptualize or be creative within those confines as you can be. And so therefore you are faced with a constant barrage of people blocking your shot. I have dreams for my people, and it is extremely frustrating when people cannot see the dream or do not want to fund the dream or do not want to use their power to advance the dream. So it's challenging.
I understand. Excuse me. So you're a researcher by training. So do you measure success in this work quantitatively or qualitatively?
Well, the researcher in me has to say both. And so quantitatively, I can tell you that Per year, we serve 3,000 people who come through the doors of the pillars for all of those services that I've mentioned. Qualitatively, I can tell you that, and here is how those people have been impacted. When they tell me this is home, this is my safe space, this is the place where I have grown from just coming in and hanging out in the computer lab where I am just engaging with that machine one-on-one, but I knew I was in a safe space too, and now I have the benefits of yoga and the benefits of meditation. This is how it's impacting me. I don't use when I'm here because I have the tools that I need. That's the narratives that support the quantitative data. But by trainer, I am a qualitative researcher. I want to know the who, what, where, when, and why. I want to know far beyond what drug are you using and how long have you been using it. I want to know, who were you before you met your drug of choice? Tell me about your family. Tell me about your connection to the community. Tell me about your spirituality. Tell me about your human resources and how you feel about the community that you're in. And how does that contribute to either your recovery and or why you still use? So yeah, it's the qualitative that drives me to do the work that I do.
Yeah. All right. So what more can be done in public policy to deal with addiction prevention and recovery?
So I won't only go down the easy road of funding. And I think it's extremely important to make sure that people who are impacted by policy are at the table and driving policy. Far too often, we're seeing that policies are designed and developed without the voices of those even, the well-meaning policymakers are trying to enact. So I think the biggest thing that we can do is to make sure that the voices, whatever the policy is, the voices of the people are at the table.
Yeah. When I was a legislator, I was given a speech to the American Lung Association. And I don't know what it was that initially drew them to have me talk, but they didn't know my history. They didn't know that I grew up with childhood asthma. And, I think it was a bill that I was pushing because somebody in the community made me aware that children in Mississippi that had asthma, if they had an inhaler, they had to go to the office or the school nurse, drop off their inhaler there, and then go to class. So if they had an attack, right, then that school nurse would have to find their particular inhaler, get to that classroom, and all that stuff. And so I was able to get legislation passed to say, I think it's all right for that kid to have the inhaler with them. Because if they need it, they need it. Because if you can't breathe, that's a game changer. That's game over, right? And so, that led me to being on the state task force and all that stuff, and then hearing more stories and trying to push legislation and all that stuff. So it means a lot. And this is more to the listeners than you, but it means a lot for people that are going through something to engage with the elected officials. Just because these people get elected don't mean that all of a sudden their IQ just raised tremendously, right? They're the same human being they were when they got elected. They just have an obligation now. And so part of our job is not just to vote for them, but to inform them and to guide them and say, hey, look, now that you're in this position, I need help with X, Y, and Z. What can you do to make that help? So I'm glad that you understand that and that you're constantly engaged with the elected officials in your community, and you constantly bring people to the table that need to be heard. Because that's the ultimate thing. There's a lot of people in politics that think, the sun rises and sets with them. I don't know where they got that notion when you had to do the same thing I did, knock on doors and give speeches and beg people to vote for you. So, it's always good to have people in the community that reminds folks that, hey, you need to listen to people. So I'm glad that you answered it the way that you did. All right. So let's close this out. In January of 2024, you were inducted into the Online Museum of African American Addictions Treatment and Recovery Hall of Fame. How did that distinction make you feel?
That was probably one of my biggest honors because it was our people recognizing the work that I'm doing for our people. And, I've received several commendations and recommendations, at the White House, right? But that moment was pivotal for me because I don't need the recognition of those others, but to have it from my people saying, we see you, we champion you, we stand behind you, we lift you up is really a game changer for me because that's why I do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely feel the same way, because in this industry that we're in now, as far as, me, as far as podcasting, the only award show I apply for is the Black Podcasters Awards because, and I've been fortunate to be nominated twice. And I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back, but it's to be in agreement with what you're saying is that it means a lot more when it's your people that understand the work that you're doing. They recognize that you're out there, that, it's like an NAACP Image Award means more than an Oscar. Now, it doesn't relate to pay, right? If you get an Oscar, it's like, bam, you're guaranteed X amount of dollars every movie you make. But you can see it with the artist that it's like it's more emotional and to be honest, it's more attainable because you're doing what you want to do to help our folks. And so for our community to say, yeah, we see what you're doing, we appreciate that. And we want you to keep going. That's tremendous. So I threw that question in there because I just wanted to see. Not very often, you get to hear about people doing the work and being recognized for it by our own folks. So, yeah, I was glad I was able to get that in. So, Dr. Felecia Pullen, let me just say it's an honor to meet you, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. If people want to get more engaged in what you're doing financially, commitment, pick your brain, how can people reach out to you?
Directly through the pillars. Our website, if they wanted to donate or find where we're located, come and participate in services, call me, is www.pillars, PILLARS, nyc.org. And all information is there for anyone that wants to get involved or to participate. We even have virtual services, free medical appointments virtually, meditation virtually. So if they're not in New York City, they can still receive the benefits of some of what we offer.
Okay. Well, Dr. Pullen, thank you for coming on the podcast. Again, it's been an honor and much continued success in your personal journey as well as the journey of the work that you're doing.
Thank you. It was an honor to be here, and I appreciate the connection, and I would love to continue to converse with you, somebody who's like-minded. I appreciate you and what you do.
Well, one of the rules is now that you've been a guest, you have an open invitation. Anytime you want to come on, feel free to do that. And I'll definitely be keeping you in mind about certain things. I already got something in mind, but I got to have more talks with God to make sure that happens. So, but again, thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, guys. And we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right. And we are back. So I want to thank Angela Giampolo and Dr. Felecia Pullen for coming on the show. As I stated at the beginning, These are two incredible women who are making a tremendous impact in the communities that they live in and really nationwide by setting an example and making a difference, whether it's fighting for individual rights or providing hope and comfort to people who are trying to improve their individual lives, right? And so I just want to thank them for coming on, thank them for doing what they do. And as always, we're going to continue to highlight those folks. As part of our journey in making sure that people like that are highlighted, we are continuing our drive for 20,000 subscribers. You can go to patreon.com/momentEricFleming and do that. It's only $1. If you want some nice little souvenirs, you can pay a little more and you'll get that. But, the most important thing is just trying to build a subscriber base up. I've noticed I've been getting an increase in followers in certain social media sites. That's cool. And I've been connecting with some fellow podcasters who are doing the work in their respective communities and reaching out to folks, whether it's strictly audio or, through TikTok and YouTube and all that. And I appreciate the work that they're doing. And, I encourage you to, listen to as many of them as you can, cause I'm not the only perspective out there. I'm not the only person watching this craziness that's going on. And, there might be some people that might relate to other podcasters better than me. That's fine. We're all in this mission together, is to keep you informed, give you our perspective about what's happening, and hopefully enlighten you and activate you to do the right thing. As I'm recording this, there'll be a lot of people activated for June the 14th, which is No King's Day. It's also traditionally Flag Day, but the Army is going to celebrate its 250 years of service to the nation. And fortunately, unfortunately, it'll depend on what side of the bread you butter, is also the president's birthday. So we're going to have this big parade and, he's going to finally have his Bastille Day, right? He's been wanting to have it ever since he went to France. And since he idolizes all these other dictators that have these military parades, he's finally going to get it off the backs of the Army doing their planned celebration in Washington, D.C. But as I stated, there's also No King's Day. And so there's going to be a lot of people out there protesting and reminding people that we didn't anoint a king, or a king wasn't anointed to us. We elect our leaders. And even though he has said publicly, and I'll get into that a little more in the commentary, but he said that he doesn't see himself as a king. Well, action speaks louder than words, sir. So, there's that. And so, and while he may not think that he's a king, he definitely thinks that he's an authoritarian. He hasn't denied that part. So anyway, please support the podcast. And I want to get into the commentary, but the way I want to do it is a little different, because I just want to highlight how crazy stuff is, right? And we're talking about protesters. Well, in Los Angeles, people have been protesting, and they haven't been protesting citywide. The city is not on fire. I repeat, the city of Los Angeles is not on fire. The city of Los Angeles, part of the city, was on fire earlier this year, and the president tried to cut off the water, right? So, it's like when it really was on fire, there were no National Guard troops. There were not federalized by him. There was no Marines. And if it was up to him, there'd be no water, right? And so I greatly appreciate those of y'all who listened and contributed to help those folks out during that time. And they still need help because they're still trying to rebuild. But in the meantime, with all these ICE raids that have been happening nationwide, and particularly in Los Angeles, people decided that they were going to protest. And so they basically gathered downtown LA and decided they were going to demonstrate and show their disapproval for the policy being implemented in their city. And the president decided he was going to federalize the National Guard. Now, if they had been tearing the city apart, if they had been equivalent to what happened after those officers were acquitted for beating Rodney King, okay, and the police couldn't handle it, okay, that's kind of like why that power is there. But just because people were out in the streets, downtown, there were a few people burning Waymos and doing graffiti stuff, which we strongly discourage, but nothing to the point that it was out of control. I mean, the Los Angeles Police Department had it pretty much contained. And President Trump and his minions, including Kristi Noem, decided to make a show of it, right? And got Pete Hegseth involved and sending Marines, right? And so you understand these people are not trained to do law enforcement, not in communities, right? You have some military police, but they handle military issues. They have a whole code of military justice. So those officers fall into that realm, not like people like I used to be or others that are out in the streets or in the jails or whatever. And so it's kind of out of their skis. So, if their whole mission was just to protect federal buildings, okay. Especially where they're keeping some of the detainees that they've gathered up in these raids. Okay. But to be out in the streets and trying to do riot control and all that stuff, it's an overkill. It really was. So something evolved out of that. Really, really heinous. And it will tie into everything else that I got to say. But I want to play Secretary Noem addressing a group of people at a press conference, and I'll come in after a certain point.
Grateful that you all are here. My name is Kristi Noem. I'm the Department of Homeland Security Secretary for President Donald J. Trump. And I am so thankful for the men and women of law enforcement who have been working every single day to bring law and order and peace back to the citizens of Los Angeles and to the state of California. As you know, we've seen under this last week some operations that have been working to bring in criminals that have been out on our streets for far too long. Our HSI and ICE individuals have been out conducting operations with our government partners to make sure that these criminals, bad actors, murderers, rapists, pedophiles, traffickers, and drug traffickers are brought in and brought to justice finally under this administration. I do want to thank the men and women of law enforcement. They've been absolute rock stars in what they've done to protect this community and to protect this city. I want to specifically name those that are under the umbrella within our components, under the Department of Homeland Security. That has been our ICE officers who have been on the front line out there interdicting with many of these dangerous criminals. Also, HSI with their investigative skill set and tactical teams have been absolutely imperative to us in helping us make sure we're running operations and really targeting these bad actors. Our Federal Protective Services and also our Border Patrol agents have come and been partners with us in an incredible way. They bring a skill set that has helped us have a whole of government approach under the Department of Homeland Security that has never happened before. The assets that they have and the willingness to do their jobs that this president has allowed them to do has been absolutely incredible. But what you see standing behind me, too, is also other federal partners that have come to the table that are here to bring safety and security to the city of Los Angeles. I want to specifically thank the Army. I want to thank the Marines, the National Guard, our soldiers, our military men and women who have shown up here to help make sure that we have security. Not only do they protect our country around the world, but they're doing it every single day here in the United States of America, too, and doing it as service, public service to the people in this country because they took an oath to uphold the law. We also have a U.S. attorney here here who has been aggressive, has been making sure that we don't pick winners and losers in this country, that the rule of law will be followed, and that people who break the law and perpetuate violence will be brought to justice. They will be prosecuted, and there will be consequences for that kind of activity. The Department of Justice is here and has a presence in our Incident Command Center, as well as the DEA, the FBI, and their investigative teams have been fantastic with their leadership. And we also have the IRS here that's helping us track how these violent protesters are funded, what NGOs out there, what unions, what other individuals may be funding these violent perpetuators that are in these protests that take people who may be wanting to come and be peaceful, but instead turn these into very violent activities that go after law enforcement. That's just simply not acceptable. And I also want to thank our U.S. Marshals. They've been so great in helping us to secure facilities, but also operations, and also with transportation, that as soon as someone is arrested and brought into incarceration, that they are transported out and able to face prosecution and the consequences for their crimes. I want people to know that while these officers and these agencies and our military are here doing this work and these operations, that the people across this country are so grateful. They are so grateful for the work that is being done here in Los Angeles. They are setting an example for what is happening across the country in other cities and putting together a model and a blueprint for how we can continue to work to make every single community great again and safe again for our kids and for our grandkids far into the future. I've been in many different states with all the different components that I represent over the last 4 or 5 days. And everywhere I go, people stop me and say, tell everybody who's working in Los Angeles that is working to bring safety to those city streets and to those families and protect those small business. Tell them thank you. Tell them God bless you, that I hope that they are safe and they have been suffering. The people that live here under the policies of Governor Newsom and under the policies of Mayor Bass, and they recognize that it's a huge disservice to the people who have to try to raise their families here, and that these agents and that these law enforcement officers are working to change that and give them an opportunity to be successful and to live the American dream.
So you heard that, right? That was Kristi Noem basically telling you all that this is a model of how they're going to go about targeting cities that have Democratic leadership, and in the very rare cases, cities and states that have Democratic leadership, and how they're going to go about doing what they want to do and imposing their will and basically terrorizing a segment of the population. Because I wanted to be clear. They're not just going after criminals. That's good rhetoric, and that gets people in the mindset. It's like, yeah, we need to get the criminals out. And it's kind of like, yeah, you want to get criminals out. That's the whole thing. You know, you don't want criminals on the streets. Doesn't matter if they were born here or somewhere else. You want them off the streets. But, you know, it's the blanket approach, right? It's like anybody that fits the profile, grab them. Anybody that fits the profile, stop their car. Anybody that fits the profile, detain them, right? I mean, wasn't the criteria at one point, if they had tattoos, send them to El Salvador? Isn't that what we were doing? So, you know, now I stopped it at a certain point because at that point, the senior senator from California walked in, and he was not technically invited to the press conference, but he was let in because people recognized he was the senior senator from the state of California. And he came in right around when she was disparaging Governor Newsom and Mayor Bass. So at that point, the senator, you know, wanted to interject and wanted to ask the secretary a question. And at that point, the same officers who let him in the building basically manhandled him and threw him out of the room, right? And, you know, I heard somebody who's not a political commentator, who is now all of a sudden trying to be one, and I guess trying to be a politician too, try to disparage the senator for doing that, for showing up at the press conference and being disruptive. But this same person didn't say that when a certain U.S. Congresswoman from Georgia acted a fool at the State of the Union, right? She was disruptive. Did nobody kick her out of the Capitol building? He didn't get on his podcast and blast her for her actions, right? But this guy, he can't, the rules of engagement change, right? So if you could disrupt a president of the United States of the State of the Union, surely a senator can disrupt a secretary in the president's cabinet, especially when she's saying some disparaging about his colleagues, people that help govern the state that he represents, right? And the city that he represents. He wanted to shut that down. And, at this point, decorum be damned, right? It's pretty clear that decorum only works on one side. And they judge what is appropriate and what is not. And that's bullshit. That's not how that works. You can't have the double standard. If you're going to be an asshole to the president of the United States, then everybody's fair game. Since you didn't apologize for that, since you didn't feel that that was out of bounds, then let the chips fall where they may. As somebody that's been in politics, I don't like that. I don't like the fact that it's gotten to that point, but it is what it is. I just know that had that ever happened to me, there is no way I would rest until, one, those officers that physically tackled me would no longer be in law enforcement. I promise you that would be a never ending quest, right? And then there's no way that I wouldn't be trying to get the people that authorized that, was Kristi Noem or Donald Trump. There's no way they would stay in power. There's nothing they could do. There's nothing they could say at this point outside of an apology. A sincere apology, not an apology to save face or whatever. I mean, like, bro, we did not know that was you. That's not how we roll. It's, but you're never going to get that from them because that's how they are. Right. And I've just come to realize that it's not just the United States, it's worldwide. The right wing thought process, the right wing political apparatus in the world has literally lost their mind. And, I said this on the last podcast, I think, or previous one, I'm sure it's, there's no honor among thieves. So they will even disrespect each other, let alone disrespect right-minded people or people that are just trying to do the right thing or just maybe have a different viewpoint of how to do the right thing, right? Because the old saying, a broken clock tells the time right twice a day. So every now and then these crazy people will have a good idea and you can get some of us to get behind it now, or at least a good thought. And we might differ on the approach, but if there's a concept we agree with, we'll go with that. That's what reasonable people do, but not these folks, right? These folks is their way or the highway. And it was up to them, they blow up the highway. So you wouldn't have no option. I mean, that's just it. I mean, you let Kristi Noem and Pam Bundy and Carolyn Levitt and all these other folks get on there with and it seems like every press hit, their crucifixes or crosses are getting bigger around their necks. They wanted to give you the impression that Los Angeles was burning down, that people were just out in the streets terrorizing everybody. And it was just chaos and mayhem. And the LAPD was just overwhelmed and blah, blah. If there's any police department in the United States, I can name two others that are pretty equal, in my opinion. It's like the Los Angeles PD, they're used to dealing with riots. They have never been friendly when it comes to protesters. It's just not how they roll, right? It's never been my experience in watching what they do, but they're a major city. And so they are they have a population of over 5 million people. So they have a police force that is geared for mass demonstrations. They have a police force that's geared toward mass unrest, if there is unrest, right? Of a violent nature. And if it got to the point where they couldn't handle it, they would be saying, hey, governor, call the president, tell him we need some help. They hadn't made that call. They had the situation under control. But Donald Trump, just like he did when he was president the first time, wanted to send a message. You remember the first time, there's a park. If you've ever been to D.C., there's a park right across the street from the White House called Lafayette Park. And that's traditionally the public square where people protest whoever the president is, right? There's people that basically homeless people who have become professional protesters. They sleep in the park and they got signs or whatever. But that's usually the place where people gather. Now, the park is in between the White House and this church that has been there forever. And since the inception of the city, pretty much. And it's tradition that the president of the United States, the sitting president of the United States, attends at least one church service at that church. I'm trying to think who broke that tradition. Somebody seemed to have broken, I don't know, but it seems like every president has attended this church at one point in time during their term. And so Donald Trump wanted to send a message. This was in the height of the Black Lives Matter protests, George Floyd protests. And when he and Mark Milley were cool, they set it up where the military cleared a path, just tear gassed and moved these people out of Lafayette Park so the president could walk from the White House, stand in front of this church, hold the Bible upside down, and make it a press op. That's it. He didn't have anything substantive to say. He just wanted to send a message, right? And that's what this show of force in L.A. is. They're sending a message. Now, there have been raids in Mississippi. There's been protests in Mississippi. He hasn't sent the National Guard. He hasn't federalized the National Guard to deal with the protests there because there's a Republican governor, right, that he's cool with. In Texas, he ain't had to do it. Abbott just unleashed the National Guard to get ready for these No King Day protests that's happening, plus the protests that are already going on in Texas. Because it's Greg Abbott, right? But these people, in Florida, it's like you got a sheriff talking about, if you spit on an officer, we're going to shoot you. You know what I'm saying? What are we doing? And that's okay to say out loud. You have basically told us what your use of force form is going to look like, right? If you're standing in the way of a car, you're going to get run over. And Governor DeSantis doubled down on that, right? So when I say the right wing has lost it, I mean that. I don't know if there's any coming back to that, right? I think if there's going to be a new Republican Party, they're going to be more centrist. Because the right wing, they're trying to say the alt-right. No, this is not an alternative. This is this is who they are. And it's like, if you just get your news from the conservative media outlets, you're thinking, LA is about to explode, literally. And you're thinking everything is justified. And it is not. It is not anywhere close to that. It's just really, really sad. And then to see what they did to the senator now, supposedly afterwards, the secretary did talk to him and tried to do a mea culpa on that, but, and then she turned around on Fox News and said he didn't identify himself. If you've watched the news clips, you clearly, if there's nothing else, you make out what he's saying. He's saying, I am Senator Alex Padilla. He's saying that out loud as they are manhandling and tackling him, right? The same people who escorted him into the room are now putting handcuffs on him. what are we doing? Right? I'm just telling you, it's like, there's certain things that, I miss being in elected official. I miss being in politics at that level. But there's no way I would tolerate that. No way. You're not going to manhandle me like you did Mayor Baraka or the congresswoman from New Jersey, who now you're indicting for manhandling. You beat her up, and then you charge her, Elena Harbor, the lady who couldn't stop Donald Trump from getting 34 felony convictions. Now she's going to try to convict a U.S. congresswoman, right? It's insane. And then on this day, right, they're having an oversight hearing. So they've invited the governor. They couldn't get Newsom because Los Angeles, right? But they excused him. But they had Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, former vice presidential running mate of Kamala Harris, Governor Pritzker of Illinois, and Governor Hochul of New York, had them up there. And all the Republicans wanted to do was just put on the show. It's like maybe a few of them asked some questions about immigration policy, because technically that's what that hearing was about. But, you got Nancy Mace, who I offered to come on the show. Her press people took the information, haven't responded. I don't know. I guess I don't have enough followers. I don't agree with her approach. So whatever. And that's been kind of there's been a few people, and I'm grateful to the Republicans that have come on the show, the Trump supporters that have come on the show. And there's an open invitation for folks. If I invite you to come on, we're going to have a civil conversation. You may try to act a fool, but that's not going to happen. You'll be able to get your points across. And as always, I can do what I'm doing right now if I think what you're saying is crazy, and just, take my time and tell you how I feel. But I'm going to give you respect that you don't give governors of their respective states if they're not of your party, or senators even, right? But, they got on there, Marjorie Taylor Greene, she was in her element too. And, everybody just, and this one young guy, I don't know, he was trying to score some points on Pritzker, and it's like, yeah, he's not that dude. He's not that dude. And he's really not that dude because he's wealthy. He's like a lot of these Republican senators and elected officials. He's got a lot of money. So he ain't worried about anything you do to him, So, he, just crazy. And then you got the chairman of the committee trying to tell a member to just shut up. Just crass stuff. And it's really a bad optic because most of the Republicans are white folks. You got, Byron Donalds, who finally showed up at a committee meeting, and Luna from Florida, but pretty much everybody else is white. It was some woman. It was like, are you filling the seat for your late husband? It's like, how long have you been in Congress? You talking about Feinstein and all these other, Pelosi and all these other folks. It looks like you've been up there a long time too. You trying to go after these younger, sharper minded governors, trying to put zingers on them. It was a bad look, right? So all that was going on. While a U.S. senator is being tackled by law enforcement, this hearing was happening. So numerous members and this is why Maxwell Frost was being told to shut up, because he was trying to get the chairman to commit to having Kristi Noem come before the committee, the oversight committee, right? It's just crazy. And then to top it all off, to cap our night off, Israel decided that tonight was the night, or last night was the night, as I'm recording this, that they wanted to take out Iran's nuclear program. Supposedly According to their intelligence reports, they took out all the military leaders that were over the program. They took out the scientists, took out some major targets. So we know Iran's going to respond. But the reason why I use the no honor among thieves quote is because they didn't communicate with the United States that they were going to do that. Now, they used some of our weapons, but they did not communicate with the United States to go launch this attack. And the reason why we know that is because the president had sent his special envoy to Iran to try to negotiate a deal where they would shut down the nuclear weapons, which, if you follow the details, sounds very similar to what President Obama had done, but because Obama did it, Trump scrapped it. Now he was basically about to offer the same plan or close to it. And this envoy is on his way. And it would seem like that if Netanyahu and Trump were communicating, that would have been conveyed, and you probably shouldn't be shooting rockets into a country where the United States is sending their special envoy to negotiate with the government you're about to attack. And then they get on their state TV in Israel and say, okay, people, just be ready. We just did something. So get ready for missiles to start being blown up over your houses. These people have lost their minds, bro. They've lost their minds, and they want power, and they want power to stay away from being accountable. Usually people that are seeking power are supposed to be the models of accountability. These people are seeking power so they don't have to be accountable, especially from a criminal aspect. Donald Trump ran for president so he wouldn't go to jail. Netanyahu ran for prime minister so he wouldn't go to jail, right? And they want to stay in power, so they're going to create chaos. So put it into people's mind, well, we need them because we're in a state of chaos, right? People want stable leadership when things are chaotic. Never mind the fact that the leadership that's trying to say, hey, you need to keep me, is the one who created the chaos in the first place, right? So I've just come to the conclusion that they've lost their mind. And then when you see all the talking heads like the Scott Jennings and all these guys, who's another guy I really cannot stand. He's even developed a persona where he just smirks, like he's that bully that thinks he's also smart, right? Like whatever. And trying to justify what it is. It's like, you can't justify insanity. Not to the masses. You can justify it to you. You can justify it to your own kind, but you can't justify insanity to the masses. There's enough people that realize that's crazy, and they're not going to go for it. How that will translate in any elections in the future, I don't know. I would hope that it would translate to the point where these people are not in control. It would be my wish that they would never be the majority party ever again until that element is completely out of their political ecosystem, which as long as they latch on to white supremacy as a clutch, that'll never happen. But I just still want to believe that the majority of Americans understand that this is foolishness. The struggle for those of us who are active and understand it's foolish is trying to get people who understand it's foolish and be active. Because a lot of people just want to close their blinds, close their eyes, cover their ears, and act like none of this is happening as long as they're able to go to work and buy their groceries, pay for their gas, kids go to school, everything's great. But eventually, it's going to get to you, no matter how much you try to ignore it. So my mission, and the other podcasts I mentioned, our mission is to encourage you to be more engaged. As I've stated before, you follow DC Comics, you know about all of Batman's enemies go to Arkham Asylum. And I've made the comparison that just imagine Batman's worst nightmare that everybody at Arkham Asylum escapes. They even made a video game off of that concept, right? That all of them, the Joker, the Riddler, the Penguin, all of them escaped the same night. And Batman's got to get all of them back in. What's left of it, right? Because you know they had to destroy the asylum to get out. Just imagine that. That's where we are now. Everybody is out of Arkham. And we have to be the people to try to corral them and get them back in, right? Get them out of the seats of power. Get them back in their rightful place. And it's a daunting task, but it's got to be done, because at the pace we are going now, you know, this is just the 1850s, 1860s being relived. The tensions are building to a point where the only release would be an out-and-out war. And we should have learned something from that period in history where we would not repeat that. But here we are. So, you know, we got to deal with the craziness. But in the midst of it, we need to be figuring out a way to combat it, whether it's on the street, in the State House, in the City Hall, in the White House, in the U.S. Capitol. We've got to figure out a way to combat it. And we've got to figure out a way to tell our story and convince the majority of the people, we need you to be engaged. We need you to vote these people out, and offer them a substantive plan to make their lives better, right? And there's this one sister I'm trying to get on. She posted something on LinkedIn, and I'm trying to get her on the podcast sometime this year, because what she posted to me sounds like the platform that we need, right? She broke it down in a way where it's like, yes, this is the bare bone. This is the outline for the message. These are the issues that are impacting people that need to be addressed. And we need to be unafraid to do it. If they're not afraid to cut Medicaid, if they're not afraid to cut Social Security, if they're not afraid to try to impose martial law on the citizens of this country, then we shouldn't be afraid to push for universal health care. We shouldn't be afraid to push for reparations. We shouldn't be afraid to push for universal education, amongst other things, right? We shouldn't be afraid to say what we need to say, and we need to convince the American people that it's time to go a different direction. This is going off of the rails really, really quick. And I don't want it to be a situation. It's bad enough when parents see their children going overseas to fight battles. I sure as hell don't want to see people watching folks fight battles in their front yard. You feel me on that? So let's get to work. Let's do what we got to do. There's going to be more crazy days like what happened on, you know, today I'm recording this. It's Friday the 13th. You know, yesterday was Thursday the 12th, and all the crazy stuff happened, right? Guys, we can do better. We don't have to accept this. We don't have to accept elected officials being brutalized. We don't have to accept crazy rhetoric being touted in the name of Jesus. It's not how this works. And we need to rise up and remind people how it's supposed to work. Set the example, but get engaged. Thank y'all for listening. Until next time.
NBG Podcast Network.